Russia has rejected the claim, insisting that no damage was inflicted on its fleet and denying that any such strike even took place.
A $470 million submarine sits at the bottom of Novorossiysk harbor, its conning tower breaking the surface at a severe angle. Russian damage control teams stand helpless on the pier, pumps running uselessly as seawater continues flooding the internal compartments. This isn't the result of a torpedo strike or a missile barrage. This is what happens when mathematics, deception, and patience replace brute force. And the most terrifying part? The Russians never saw it coming. The operation began not with an attack, but with a sacrifice. Deep inside Ukraine, on a damaged auxiliary runway, a Beaver strike drone accelerated down just 620 meters of cracked asphalt. Within 14 seconds, it was airborne, carrying a payload of only 35 kilograms. The moment it lifted off, the onboard computer forced it into a hard descent, stabilizing between 145 and 155 feet above ground level. This wasn't evasive maneuvering. This was calculated invisibility. Below 160 feet, terrain curvature, tree lines, and structural clutter reduce long-range radar effectiveness by more than 70%. The drone essentially disappeared into background noise. Here's where it gets interesting. The Beaver flew for nearly 3 hours across more than 720 kilometers of contested airspace. No radio link, no satellite uplink, no video stream. Emitting even half a watt of signal power would have triggered Russian electronic surveillance within milliseconds. Instead, it navigated autonomously using an anti-jamming GPS system and a laser ring gyroscope with a drift error of less than 0.01 degrees per hour. It corrected for wind deviation thousands of times per minute, maintaining a steady ground speed near 130 kilometers per hour. Russian S-400 radar systems swept the sky every 4 to 6 seconds, but the Beaver never appeared on their screens. Then, at 1:31 in the morning, everything changed. The drone detonated at a peripheral support zone near Yeysk Air Base. The blast was tiny, equivalent to less than 2 kilograms of explosive. No casualties, no structural damage. But Russian radar operators reacted exactly as Ukraine predicted. Scan sensitivity increased. Systems went active. Radar refresh rates tightened from 6 seconds to under 2 seconds. Sensitivity thresholds dropped by nearly 40%. The entire base shifted from routine monitoring to full alert status. Operators weren't just watching the sky anymore. They were interrogating it. And that reaction was the first critical mistake. Because while every Russian sensor pointed upward, a second drone was already approaching. At 4.8 kilometers from the runway, the Beaver had to climb briefly to clear high-voltage transmission lines rising from 155 feet to approximately 205 feet for just 3.7 seconds. That was enough. A Pantsir S-1 system acquired the target at 7.1 kilometers. The rotating propeller generated a micro-Doppler signature repeating at 2,300 RPM, unmistakable to close-range tracking software. Within 0.8 seconds, the turret rotated over 90 degrees, fire control radar locked, and a surface-to-air missile launched. The intercept came 2.4 seconds later, producing a sharp flash above the airfield perimeter. The drone was destroyed before reaching the runway. To Russian crews, this looked decisive. They had stopped the threat. Radar power surged by over 60%. Searchlights activated across 1.2 kilometers of tarmac. Patrol units mobilized. The base had gone fully awake, every defense system exposed, every sensor active, every operator looking up. But here's what they didn't understand. That drone had done its job by dying. The entire point was to reveal where every defense was positioned, to force every system into active mode, to make them look in one direction while the real attack came from another. Think about that for a moment. Ukraine just spent a drone worth perhaps a few $1,000s to map out millions of dollars worth of air defense systems, and the Russians fell for it completely. At 1:47, the window opened. A second Beaver strike drone crossed into Yeysk Air Base at a constant altitude of just 50 feet. No evasive movement, no altitude correction. It flew a perfectly straight line directly over the hardened stand where a fully fueled IL-38N Sea Dragon was parked. This aircraft wasn't just any patrol plane, It was Russia's only long-range airborne anti-submarine platform covering the eastern Black Sea, capable of monitoring hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of ocean. The drone passed directly above the fuselage centerline, and the payload activated. What happened next took less than 0.02 of a second. The warhead functioned as a directional airburst, projecting roughly 2,000 tungsten elements downward at speeds exceeding 1,600 meters per second. Each fragment weighed just 5 grams, but moving at that velocity, they became surgical instruments of destruction. There was no blast wave spreading outward. All energy went down. The radar dome failed instantly. The anti-submarine sensor array collapsed. Signal processors and avionics racks designed to withstand extreme vibration were disabled in seconds. Fragmentation severed hydraulic lines, ruptured fuel conduits, and cut power buses. The IL-38N didn't explode. It shut down. Within 4 seconds, onboard systems went dark. Fuel vented onto the tarmac. Mission capability dropped to 0. Structurally intact, but operationally dead. By the time a Panzer missile destroyed the drone's remaining structure in midair, the damage was already complete. Russia had lost its eyes over the Black Sea. Detection coverage collapsed entirely. By 2:00, news of the IL-38N's destruction reached Novorossiysk Harbor Command Center. What followed was pure reflex. Alert. Status jumped to maximum. Within 8 minutes, tugboats pushed decommissioned steel barges weighing up to 1,600 tons toward the main channel, flooding their valves and scuttling them to form a crude barrier. Searchlights ignited across 2 kilometers of quay. Patrol craft surged forward, engines at 80% power carving tight patterns through the harbor mouth. Crews scanned frantically for surface drones, wakes, shadows, anything that moved faster than the tide. Below the surface, the reaction was even more intense. Shore-based sonar arrays switched from passive listening to full active output, increasing transmission power by more than 300%. High-frequency pings saturated the water column, rebounding off hulls, pilings, rocks, and seabed sediment. The acoustic environment collapsed into dense clutter. Operators turned up the gain, then turned it up again. Within minutes, the harbor sounded like a closed metal chamber under constant hammering. Every return overlapped. Slow contacts vanished into noise. Anything moving under 3 knots was automatically filtered out as debris. To Russian command, this looked like control. They had sealed the harbor. They had activated every sensor. They were ready. But in reality, they had created blindness of a different kind. They weren't detecting threats. They were drowning in their own noise. And in that chaos, a space opened, narrow, silent, and completely unguarded. At 2:32, 2 Sea Baby naval drones changed their operational state. Electric motors powered down completely. Guidance systems entered passive sleep. Active sensors went dark. Each drone, weighing just over 1,000 kilograms, was trimmed to near-neutral buoyancy, holding depth within 30 centimeters of the seabed. They stopped traveling as machines and began moving as water. The Black Sea's tidal flow into Novorossiysk measured just over 2 knots that night. Slow, consistent, invisible. The drones surrendered control and let the current carry them forward. No cavitation, no propeller noise, no electrical signature. This is where the operation becomes genuinely brilliant. Russian sonar was optimized for fast contacts. At 3:30, the order came. Deep underwater, the Sea Baby drones executed their final sequence in under 4 milliseconds. Their motors pulsed once, forcing each warhead against the stern plating at a contact angle calculated to within a few degrees. Then the harbor fractured. Each drone carried explosive equivalent to roughly 1,000 pounds. In open air, that energy would have dispersed. Underwater, it had nowhere to go. The surrounding water behaved like solid concrete, redirecting nearly all force upward and inward. The pier lifted between 35 and 45 centimeters before slamming, back down. A vertical column of white water and mud surged more than 170 feet into the air. The pressure wave cracked windows over 4 kilometers away. Inside the steel hull, a programmed micro-delay created a concentrated water hammer effect. The shock breached the outer casing and slammed into the pressure hull beneath. With nowhere to escape, force rebounded through internal compartments, amplifying as it reflected off bulkheads. The propeller shaft twisted violently out of alignment. Watertight seals failed almost instantly. By the end of that day, the damage wasn't measured in explosions or wreckage. It was measured in silence. With the IL-38N blinded and a Kilo-class submarine disabled at pier, the Black Sea Fleet didn't lose a battle. It lost confidence. Patrol routes stopped. Supply movements froze. For nearly 96 hours, logistics stalled and decisions slowed, not because of firepower, but because uncertainty had taken control. So here's the final question. Was the most powerful weapon in this operation the explosive itself, or the fear of what couldn't be seen or heard? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you want more deep analysis like this, make sure you're subscribed.